Our special guest today is here to talk about goaltending, the myth of hockey, scoring. Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show. Coming up! Welcome to the program, and we have a very interesting one for you today. Our guest is a former goaltender, former goalie coach, a stats freak, self-admitted, the founder of the myth of hockey. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Gary Ray Ladler. Gary, great to have you here, my friend.
Thank you for having me. I know this is a very interesting topic and very controversial for sure. So I appreciate you at least giving me an opportunity to talk about it. And then we'll just let the listeners, viewers decide for themselves if if I'm on par or if we'll let them decide, Joe.
Right, we're going to see if there's any there. Okay. All right. So
There
let's
you
talk
go.
about first of all your favorite goalie, your personal favorite goalie, Billy Smith. And what when you were going through talking about your favorite goaltender, Billy Smith, you were researching into Billy Smith. You want to know everything you could know about Billy Smith. You found out some interesting facts. Tell us about that.
So this goes back more than 25 years ago, Joe. After a beer league game, I'm 55 years old. And after the beer league game, a bunch of us went to a pub like, Canadians do and get some beer and wings. And a long story short, we started talking about who's the best goalie of all time. And of course, I was the goalie of the group, by the way. And all of my friends on that team were talking about Patrick Waugh and Brodeur and Tretiak and Ken Dryden, Bernie Perrant, just to name a few. And so I said, Billy Smith's the best goalie of all time. I should know because I'm the goalie of the group. And Billy Smith was winning Stanley Cups between the years of 1981 to 1984. And I was a young teenager at that time looking for a childhood hero, and Billy was it. So I won't bore you with that information about me because it's not about me. So the next morning, after this critical discussion about who's the best goalie of all time, I truly wanted to find out who really was the best goalie of all time. Well, how do I do that? So the next morning, I woke up and I chose Billy Smith to research because he's my hero. So I looked at Billy's career and I saw after his 17 years or 18 years, I saw goals against average, a save percentage, and a win percentage. And I thought, okay, how can I prove that Billy was much better than other goalies? Well, I'll look at his backups. So what I did, Joe, is I added up all of the backups during those years that Billy played to get a goals against average, a save percentage, and a win percentage. And of course, Billy's in the Hall of Fame and won 4 Stanley Cups. So I'm completely expecting, and again, I was a goalie, I was a goalie coach at the time this all happened. I was expecting to find a large margin of difference. I was expecting Billy's stats to be much, much better than his backups or his partners. And in those years, there was a couple of rookies that were inserted that played a few years new to the NHL. So again, I was expecting a large margin. But I'll tell you, Joe, and this is what started the myth of hockey for me, there was no difference. The backups collectively were just as good as Billy Smith when you added all the totals together. Now, that should blow everybody's mind right there because it certainly blew my mind, Joe, because again, this guy was my childhood hero and I was expecting huge difference in numbers. So how is that possible? How is it possible that Billy's in the Hall of Fame and Kelly Rudy, Rolly Melanson, and Chico Resch, who were the 3 backups that played the bulk of those games, they're not in the Hall of Fame, but their stats collectively matched a Hall of Famer. But that shouldn't happen, Joe. If goaltending is everything that the whole hockey world thinks it is, that shouldn't have happened. So then I quickly started researching other goalies, Ken Dryden, Patrick Waugh, Martin Brodeur. And as I researched them in very detailed, looking at power play save percentages. But here's the issue is that they too were replaceable. And again, how is that possible? How is it the guys like that, these Hall of Famers, were replaceable by their backups? So it's quite fascinating that the reason goalies are in the Hall of Fame is because of wins. That's it. They haven't, not too many people have researched it so in depthly to know, because again, other goalies were doing just as well as those guys were, and they were replaceable. So how is it that that happened, Joe? It's fascinating.
So I know that, in this day and age, we're all about stats. The stats, this is the stats generation, and we created all kinds of new, types of stats and everything else, and win and war, and all kinds of different stats that we have in baseball, hockey, whatever. Uh,
Right.
so is this a case of before we were really concerned about stats? We just knew that goalies won or they lost, and that's what we
Right.
went by, or is this a relatively new thing?
Well, it is new, but again, 20 years ago when I started looking at this, let me give the one example. Martin Brodeur is considered to be one of the best goalies of all time, maybe the greatest of all time. And I'm going to use him as an example. We all think this because he won Stanley Cups and he had great stats. But what stats were those? Okay, so it was goals against average and save percentage, wins and shutouts. Those were the four stats that the hockey world looked at. And remember, the Vezina is voted on by the GMs. I don't think the GMs in the NHL spend too much time researching every season, every goalie to look deeper into the stats. And what I mean by that, here's an example. If I were to tell the viewers that Martin Brodeur won 3 Stanley Cups, okay? In winning those 3 Stanley Cups, you need to win 4 games in the Stanley Cup finals. So I'm just looking at the finals, okay, Joe? So you have to win 4 games to win the finals. He won 3 cups, so that's 12 wins in the Stanley Cup final, okay? Now, this is going to blow people away. If I were to ask people, and when I do ask people, what were the average shots in those 12 wins for Martin Brodeur? For a goalie to be great or for stealing games, shouldn't the shot average be like 34 shots or 32 shots or even 29 shots? Isn't that what would make a goalie great, a guy stealing games? Well, Martin Brodeur, believe it or not, Joe, in those 12 finals victories, had a average shot total against of only 19.8. Now, if you can't critically think and take that new information that I've just provided the viewer and go, 19.8, that's ridiculously low. Obviously, the shot quality had to not have been very good. That's the excuse I get when I present this information to some people. They go, well, he must have made the big save when he needed it. But there was only 19.8 shots, Joe, in those victories. He wasn't stealing any games. But again, we think of Brodeur's greatness because he had all kinds of shutouts and he had victories. But if you look deeper into the stats, which I've done, and here's another critical stat that people don't know. The hockey world doesn't know this. The New Jersey Devils, for most of Brodeur's careers when he was winning Stanley Cups, the New Jersey Devils took the fewest amount of minor penalties. Doesn't I mean, it's not even a question. That definitely helps the goalie's shutouts and his goals against average and his save percentage if he's facing the fewest power plays. And that this is the critical information that I researched really deep.
Well, so you've got Scott Stevenson hitting people in the head back then and not getting
Well,
penalized for it. So yeah.
well, and
So
that's the other part
the,
of Joe. Great point. And that's the other factor. Did the other goalies during Brodeur's career have A, Scott Stevens, B, Scott Niedermayer, and Danico? Like the other goalies didn't have that wall. And so when I research this and I look at Brodeur, just to use him as an example, and I'm using him only because he's considered great. If I used another goalie, then people could just brush it off. But Brodeur was so well insulated. And that's the thing. Here's the part B of my critical information that I'm sharing. Goaltenders do not influence the quality shots. The defense and the systems do. So how can, if the goalies don't create the quality shots, it's the defense that's responsible for quality shots against. then every goalie doesn't play on the same playing field. So to say Brodeur was better than Marc Tambriand or any other goalie during his era, it's not fair because they didn't play with the same insulation or they didn't face the same quality shots. Because you look at these other goalies and their four best defensemen, they don't compare to these Hall of Famers of Scott Niedermayer and Scott Stevens. Come on. And that's where we have to stop just saying, oh, it must have been the goalie that won these championships. No, it's the insulation, Joe, that provides the protection, and the goalies don't control that.
So yeah, I'm actually we got Glenn Healy coming on the show and Ken Reagan. I want to talk a little bit about Heels because he backed up some pretty good goaltenders, Mike Richter and stuff like that. I mean, would you contend that that Heels was as good or better than some of those guys?
100%. Because if you look at, let's start with Heels. If you research Glenn Healy and look at the defensemen that he played behind compared to the goalies that were winning the Stanley Cups, it's not even close. And that's the whole thing. What my point is, it's about the insulation. If Healy had played for better teams, if Ken Reagan and Bester, when they played in the 80s, okay, they played. If I could read off the names of the defensemen, I mean, Boreas Salming was on the Leafs in the 80s, but he was getting up there in age.
Yeah.
But if you compare the defensive core that Bester and Reagan had to play behind some of the other goalies in the NHL, like for another example here, another hook, if you will, is Grant Fuhr and Andy Moog. They had identical stats, but Fuhr's in the Hall of Fame and Moog isn't. Well, how is that? It's because Fuhr won the championship. He won the Stanley Cups, but it wasn't because of Fuhr that the Edmonton Oilers were winning Stanley Cups, because Grant Fuhr's save percentage and his goals against average, believe it or not, Glenn Hanlon, remember Glenn Hanlon? Glenn Hanlon, during the same years that Fuhr was winning Stanley Cups, had the same save percentage as Grant Fuhr. Glenn Hanlon had a losing record in the NHL. So if Glenn Hanlon or Healy or any other goalie was on the Edmonton Oilers and had all of that goal support, Joe, come on. It's again, because goalies don't control the shot quality, it's almost impossible to tell anybody who is a great goalie and who isn't, because it all depends on the insulation of the protection.
Well, there's a lot of people who tell you that Andrei Vasilevsky is the best goalie on the planet today, and he's got back-to-back Stanley Cup victories. He's got a trip to the Stanley Cup final, and a lot of teams that beat that Vasilevsky and the Lightning beat out will tell you that the reason that they beat them was Andrei Vasilevsky. What do you say to that?
Well, I'll tell you what I say to that. Last year's playoffs, just to use the most recent comparison, Vasilevsky against Toronto had a below 900 save percentage. Toronto lit him up. And that tells me one thing off the hop, is that Toronto has had one of the best offensive teams last year, and Vasilevsky couldn't do much to prevent that. Again, Campbell had the same save percentage as Vasilevsky, but we always just, the hockey experts, we just blow that off as, oh, that was a one-off. And here's the other thing. Vasilevsky 2 years ago, along with Fleury and Grubauer, were the top three Vezina voted goalies. Okay, again, by the general managers of the NHL. Grubauer was third in that nomination. He only lost 9 games during the shortened season. He had 30 wins and 9 losses and was third in the Vezina voting, again, voted by the GMs. Well, he goes to Seattle last year, Joe, and what happens? He's actually had the worst starting stats of any goalie in the NHL. So that tells me, again, it's more proof that it's all about the insulation. So I believe if Grubauer couldn't make Seattle a winner, what makes us think that if Vasilevsky played for Seattle, they would have been a contender? I don't buy that for a second. The Tampa Bay Lightning was the best team in the world for a reason, not because of their goaltender, because they had great insulation, great protection, keeping shots to distances and perimeters to make Vasilevsky's job easier than Grubauer's job. And that's basically, it's very simple if we look at it and break it down as the protection. Because again, Vasilevsky doesn't dictate or control the shot quality, the team does. And until goalies And until we understand that, we're always going to give the credit to the goaltender. Joe, here's an interesting thing. Never in NHL history, and this has to piss off defensemen in the NHL. Never once in NHL history have the 3 stars been defenseman Joe Smith, second star Billy Johnson, third star defensive defenseman whatever. My point is, it's not sexy to say that a game was won by 3 defensive defensemen that provide Vasilevsky his protection. It's always so much simpler to look at the stats and go, oh, Vasilevsky stopped 31 of 33. He must have been the reason. Meanwhile, the defensemen are getting crunched in corners, blocking shots, pushing guys to perimeters, getting beat up, trying to clear guys, clear screens, clear rebounds. They never get any credit, Joe. It's always the goaltender that gets the star of the game when it's a low scoring, and that's not fair. It's time for the hockey world to start giving credit to, again, it's never happened in NHL history where the 3 stars were 3 defensive defensemen or a defensive forward getting back and blocking shots, making zone exits. It's always the frickin' goalie. And I'm a former goalie, and it drives me crazy. Because the next night they give up 5 goals on less shots.
Yeah, you do make a good point. Because there is a Selke Award for the best defensive forward. Why wouldn't there be, like, in addition to the Norris Trophy, be another trophy for the best defensive defenseman? Because quite frequently that the winner of the Norris Trophy also puts up a ton of points.
And it's so much sexier just to. And again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound like I'm arrogant but why is it, Joe, that it's always the goalie that gets the recognition when it's a low-scoring game? Always. Like last night, I watched the game very closely with the Leaf game. I'm a huge Leaf fan. And Matt Murray, there's no way it was because of Matt Murray the Leafs won 5-1, but he was second star. The insulation that they provided Matt Murray, there was one save where he came across and the puck was shot into his glove. And here's the other myth of hockey. Murray slid across, the puck was shot into his glove. And you know what the color commentator said, Joe? He tracked that puck into his glove. From 8 feet away, you can't track pucks. And this brings me to the third part of the myth of hockey. Goalies do not play a position that's within their human capacity. And what I mean by that, so when I saw that the stats were, when I saw that the Stanley Cup winning goalies, the Hall of Fame goalies, when I saw that their stats were never much better than the backups, I wanted to know why. So that's when I started doing video research. I started recording games and playing them in super slow motion. And this is what I've uncovered. And this is the other part of the myth of hockey, just as important as the stats. The myth of hockey is goalies don't play a position within their human capacity. And what I mean by that is shots are traveling so fast that goalies can't react to them the way we think they are. When I break down a glove save from 18 feet, so the top of the top of the crease to the first hash mark is 14 feet. So the second hash mark is about 18 feet. When we see a goalie on a hard shot make a glove save from there, he's not tracking it, Joe. The puck simply enters the glove, and then they do they throw the glove into the air, creating that illusion or that myth that they've made or they've manufactured a tracking save, and they just simply are not. The puck hits them, they react to it, creating that illusion that they've made this tracking save. And here's my point: is if it's like saying that Mike is a better bullet catcher than John. That's impossible. We are humans. We have human limitations. Imagine a fastball. It gets thrown from 60 feet, 6 inches. Roger Clemens throwing a fastball at a batter. They can barely get the bat on the ball. And it's imagine Roger Clemens throwing a fastball from 18 feet. You can't, there's no way a catcher or a goalie is going to catch that. It's impossible. You can't. We forget that part of it is that there's limitations. So how can one goalie be better at reflex or reactionary saves than another? They can't. It's all about positioning. And so when the positioning comes down to the insulation, then obviously the better defensive teams or the better teams are going to provide a better insulation. So the better the team, the better the goalie. I don't believe the whole myth of hockey is that you need a great goalie to win championships, or at least a very good goalie. It's not true, because if that was so true, then why is it when goalies are replaced, these Hall of Famers, there doesn't seem to be ever much of a difference? And again, this is Waugh, Brodeur, Ken Dryden, Bernie Perrant. If you look when they were replaced for significant numbers, not just for 5 games, 6 games, that doesn't count. I'm talking large sample sizes. The backups or replacements did just as well. Hasek too. So there's so many, I could give you so many examples. I could bore people with the stats, but if you do the research and you look at the research, it's quite fascinating that there is a myth of hockey that goalies are overvalued. I believe the most overvalued position in all of North American pro sports.
Well, I mean, no doubt about it, the positioning has a lot to do with it, and
Of course.
everything to do with it. I remember reading Johnny Bauer's book on goaltending many, many years ago, and little pamphlets we used to get at the Esso station. And anyway, and it was all about cutting off the angles and, backing up slowly, making sure that you got the angles covered all the way through. And you're right, sometimes, goalies, you'll see them kind of overreact with a push, flipping the glove out, and when the puck comes in, the puck's already in their glove, but they finish it off. Oops, hit my mic. They finish it off and make it look spectacular. And
Joe,
for sure, there is some of that. There is some of that.
How come there's no great? If you go on YouTube right now and research great blocker saves, there is none.
No, that's all about positioning.
Because the puck hits the
blocker. Blocker's all about positioning.
Well, the puck hits the blocker and ricochets in the corner. They can't make that fancy.
What about the kick save and a beauty?
Well, and again, in super slow motion, and I have a video on my YouTube channel that shows that the puck hits the pad, then the pad extends, creating that myth of manufacturing a tracking save. But again, there at certain distance. How come nobody's ever talked about this? When I've asked experts, and I have to ask them without letting them know what I'm doing, when I ask experts, at what distance does an NHL goalie lose the ability to manufacture a tracking save? Nobody has an answer for me. Nobody can tell me that at 18.5 feet, the average NHL goaltender loses the ability to manufacture tracking saves. How come nobody discusses that? And I'll tell you, Joe, it's
right. So what makes the difference between, like, say, a Marc-Andre Fleury and some guy who didn't make it in the NHL is maybe that they can track that 18 feet instead of 18.5.
Well,
what do you say to that?
It's funny. What I say to that is I don't buy that, because even Ken Dryden in his book, him and his wife during his prime did a reflex test where when you drop the ruler and you have to catch it with your fingers like a yardstick. His wife beat him in reflex or reactionary. And he has that in his book. Ken Dryden put that, his own words, that his wife actually had better reactionary time than he did during his prime. And again, if goaltenders, if I can give one more example, Ken Dryden, when he played in college at Cornell, he went 25-2. He left Cornell and a year and a half later won a Stanley Cup. Who replaced the great Hall of Famer Ken Dryden at Cornell? A gentleman by the name of Brian Cropper. I live in Whitby. Brian Cropper lives in Ajax. Okay? Brian Cropper was only 5 feet 6.5 inches tall. He replaced the great Ken Dryden at Cornell. Again, Dryden went 25-2 to win a national championship. Brian Cropper, a name that your viewers have never heard of, in Cornell went 27-0, and Cornell won back-to-back championships with Brian Cropper, who's not in the Hall of Fame. Again, I ask the viewers, if Ken Dryden was so instrumental and skilled for Cornell, how is it that Brian Cropper simply filled in for him and went 27-0 with the same stats, goals against and save percentage? Because again, it's the team is far more critical, because they're the ones that decide the quality shots by their systems. Goaltending is a product of their environment. And that's why Grubauer was a star on Colorado 2 years ago, and he was terrible last year, not because he lost his skill, not because he lost his goalie coach, not because he lost his reactionary time, but because he's now reliant on the product in front of him providing the insulation or protection.
Right, but there are other factors involved too. Like, it's a confidence thing. You lose your mojo. It just happens in all sports. But And I think about like what happened. Look at Marc-Andre Fleury. He leaves Pittsburgh and he goes to the expansion team, the Las Vegas Knights, and leads them to the Stanley Cup final. I mean, you don't think
And
that? I mean, he's not playing in front of Scott Stevens and Scott Niedermayer.
well, those were the systems because what happened to Fleury. So again, I don't like it. This isn't an argument or a debate. So I love you, Joe. So last year, 2 years ago, he won the Vezina, right, as the best goalie for Vegas. And what happened last year on Chicago? He was terrible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No.
And so
nobody's going to argue that the team has a lot to do with it. No question about it.
Well, and so I guess my answer to you is the team was good. It's about the protection and the systems. Again, the Vegas, you don't have to have big names to be successful, right? Again, it's if Vegas obviously were playing very dedicated. And here's another thing, just to add to your point, why almost every single goalie, their save percentage goes down in the playoffs. Why? Because obviously teams play differently. They play what we always hear, playoff hockey. Playoff hockey reduces the goalies or increases the goalie save percentage because now they're playing very much tighter systems. And again, I have hundreds of examples of goalies being replaced. Patrick Waugh retired from Colorado with one of his best stat years ever. And who replaces him? Well, the backup goes in and just as good a job, played 66 games. And here's another thing. This is what's really interesting. Patrick Waugh, the last year he played in the NHL, again, he had very good stats. He got nominations for Vezina and even Hart Trophy. Well, the goalie that replaced the great Patrick Waugh, he did better than Patrick Waugh. He didn't get a single Vezina vote, even though he played 60 games and had great stats. Because again, the GMs aren't researching it. They're not sitting down and looking at every goalie every year. So I believe the Vezina Trophy is you got to take it with a grain of salt because I don't believe the GMs are sitting down researching every goalie. Why can't the best goalie, Joe, be on the last place team?
Isn't the Vezina Trophy voted by the writers, the hockey writers?
No, that's the Conn Smythe.
I
Correct me if
thought
I'm
they
wrong, but
voted
that's
in the
the Conn
Vezina as
Smythe.
well. Yeah, I thought they voted in Vezina as well. But in any case, it can be a popularity contest to a degree, no doubt about that.
Well, and my last point on that is why can't the goalie on the last play, Mark Denis in 2002, 2003, he played 70 games like Brodeur did. But Marc Denis faced 700 more shots than Martin Brodeur did in Jersey. But what happened to Marc Denis' career? And this is the sad part, because I truly believe that the insulation and the protection makes goalies rich and famous. Marc Denis faced 700 more shots than Martin Brodeur. And if you look very detailed at those stats, most games that Brodeur played for New Jersey that year in 02-03 faced less than 25 or 26 shots, like almost half of his games. Marc Denis on the last place team, he rarely saw games with less than 25 or 26 shots. In fact, most of his games were over 30 shots. So how's that a level playing field? So, and this is what happens, and this is why it's unfair, and why what I just said, that teams make goalies rich and famous. Because if Martin Brodeur had to play for the Columbus Blue Jackets and he was facing 700 more shots, do you think Martin Brodeur wins them a Stanley Cup and wins the Vezina? Not a chance. There's no way. But if Marc Denis, who, by the way, had a better PK save percentage than the great Martin Brodeur that year, and that should be eye-opening in itself, because these are the deeper stats that nobody looked at. How many shots? How many PK shots? Where were the shots coming from? Were they quality shots? How come? And this is the whole point, is that it's not a level playing field. So the Marc Denis of the world, and here's the critical part too, Joe. When GMs, coaches, when they see that when they lose, who do they blame? If the owner comes to the team and says, "Hey, coach and GM, why did we suck this year?" First, you know what? The easy cop out, or our goalie wasn't very good. Right? Not my systems were poor. The coach isn't going to say that. The GM's not going to say, well, I didn't provide enough protection for the goalie. Let's just blame the goalie. So Marc Denis, and eventually he just gets pushed out of the league because everybody thinks he stinks because he gave up more goals than Martin Brodeur, even though he faced 700 more shots. It's not fair, Joe. It's not fair.
But you know what? I'm thinking that probably, Gary, there's a lot of goaltenders who would agree with you as to you know.
Well,
By the
I'll
way,
tell you.
Fix just done some quick research for us, our producer, and he said that the GMs do in fact vote on the Vezina. So you're
Right.
correct.
Yeah, and it's just, Joe. Again, this is very. I know this is crazy for me to say goalies are overvalued and they're a product of their environment. But again, I didn't wake up 3 weeks ago and start this research. It's over 20 years old. And when I tell defensemen this, because I have friends that used to play in the NHL, when I tell them these stats, they go, "Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that." Because again, we're not given all of the information. People say, well, you can't, stats isn't everything. Well, that's the only reason Brodeur is considered to be one of the best is because of the shutouts, which is a stat, because of his wins, which is a stat, and because he's won the Vezina, which isn't even a stat. That's just a voted on thing, again, by GMs who aren't doing the research. But if you look that he faced the fewest shots on the power play or on the penalty kill, that's got to be that's an important stat, Joe, and nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about the 19.8 shots he only had to face to win 3 Stanley Cups. And by the way, in his losses, he had in the losses in the Stanley Cup final, he had 26 shots against. Wow, what a difference. When his team's winning, 19.8 shots against him, but when they lost in the finals, he had 26 against him, proving once again it's all about the insulation or the protection that the defensive systems gave him.
Well, it's like it's a funny thing, but in sports, in all the sports, it's the same kind of thing. Like the coaches, the general managers will go with the guys that they're comfortable. They'll hire the coach that they're comfortable with. The coaches will hire the players that they're comfortable with. It doesn't always come down to a case of who's better stats wise, or it's kind of who they are comfortable with, who maybe as a team the players are comfortable with, and what it boils down to is when you win you pull the right strings, when you lose you pull the wrong strings. You got the wrong chemistry, you got the wrong this, you got the wrong that. But that's kind of. I just want to ask you one question because being in the Leafs area here, what would you think is the biggest reason Maple Leafs have been unsuccessful for 18 years and counting in the playoffs, not winning it around?
Why do I think the Leafs haven't been successful? Well, in the last 5 years, and here this I don't believe it has anything to do with the goaltending. Again, because I believe goaltending is the product of their environment. The Leafs have the best offensive team the last 4 or 5 years. Do we really expect that those forwards that we have play the game with defensive first mentality? Because I often hear Toronto fans blaming our defense. Oh, the defense sucks. We're not tough enough. We're not this. Defense, defense, defense. And sometimes we blame the goalie. The last time I checked, there are 6 guys protecting the net in the defensive zone. Not one guy in net, not 2 defensemen. There's 6 guys protecting the goal in the defensive zone. The 3 forwards are also just as responsible for providing the insulation to prevent goals. And I don't believe, maybe they're getting better, but I don't believe that our studs, our offensive studs, are that focused on our defensive systems. I think Marner's good at blocking shots. Matthews a good 2-way center. He's good at getting zone exits, digging the puck out of his own corner. He's like the third defenseman back there. But again, it's the Leafs outplayed Tampa Bay last year. They should have won. They were the better team, and it had nothing to do with goaltending. We lit up Vasilevsky last year. And so I think this is finally their year. And here's another thing. Matt Murray was a stud in Pittsburgh on a good team with Crosby, Malkin, Letang. He goes to Ottawa, doesn't do very well as far as wins go. He's now on Toronto. Watch what happens, Joe. He's going to be Vezina talk.
Right.
I'll guarantee you, if he doesn't get hurt and he stays healthy, either him or Samsonov, they'll have a ton of more wins than they did last year. Because again, I believe, well, it's not even that I believe this, Joe. It's just my research provides this. I'm just the messenger. Murray's gonna, if he stays healthy, he's gonna get a ton of wins in Toronto. There's gonna be Vezina talk because I do believe that finally the Toronto the forwards are they're starting to understand that there's 3 zones in hockey, not just one. And I believe, to answer your question, long-winded, I believe this is the Leafs year, getting past the first round, maybe the second round, because I finally believe they're buying into all 6 players are responsible for the insulation to provide the goalie less scoring chances against, or at least quality chances.
Well, it's taken a long time to learn that lesson because they've been trying to preach it to them for quite a while now. And by the way, Jack Campbell was in the Vezina conversation up until January last year. Just
right.
Remember. Listen, Gary, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. Let me know when you come out with the book, because that'll be an interesting read. And we should get some pushback with this. I expect some. It'll be fun to hear
I
comments
guarantee you, Joe, that I'm gonna get lambasted. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. But again, I didn't start this 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago. This is a long, in-depth, and I can't tell you in 20 minutes all of the information I've provided. But I do thank you for your 20 minutes. I truly do.
Well, maybe we'll have you back on the show later on with a myth debunker. Okay, so there we go.
Well, when Leafs when Leafs go to the third round and Matt Murray is in the Vezina talk and maybe wins it, maybe you can have me back on your show.
Beautiful. I hope that happens for sure.
Thanks,
all right,
Joe.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for being on the show. Well, more sports.
And I'm proud of you, by the way, Joe, for all the work you've done. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you, buddy.
More Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show coming up after the break. Guests on Joe Tilley Sports receive a gift certificate from Classica Imports. Top of the line imported men's clothing. Check out the Classica Essential Collection now. Go to shopclassica.com. Addiction Rehab Toronto, Toronto's #1 alcohol and drug treatment center, saving lives, reuniting families. The only treatment center in the province to offer medical detox, treatment, sober living, and lifetime aftercare all in one place. Our unique and specialized programs are designed to equip our clients with the tools to successfully lead a life of dignity, respect, and purpose. Let us help save your life or your loved one's life. Call today for more information or to facilitate an intervention. 1-855-787-2424 or visit addictionrehabtoronto.ca. Joe Tilley Sports is brought to you by COSA, Central Ontario Standardbred Association, providing a united voice for harness horse people racing at Ontario tracks. Check out your benefits today at COSAonline.com and check out COSA TV on Facebook and YouTube for all the latest harness news and live action updates. Live racing year-round. Go to HPIBet.com for all your wagering options. Become a member today and your first bet is free. That's HPIBet.com.
Do you know why that happened? You didn't fix your ball mark. The birds around here are very protective of the course, and when people don't take care of it, this is what happens. And at least one other. Hey, look at the bright side. We're not up on the northern course. They've got bears and moose. Visit moregolf.ca today. You'll find everything a golfer could need, from balls, gloves, and clubs to custom fitting opportunities and training gear. Go to moregolf.ca and get $20 off your first purchase of $100 or more. Just enter the promo code JTSports.
Our COSA race recap. We're going to take you back to the Breeders' Crown that weekend at Mohawk.
Working on a mystery, moving up on cover. This is the plan.
In the open pace, the big boys, led by Bulldog Hanover, the world record holder, trained and owned by Jack Darling. This is a true superstar, folks, and he showed us why. Dexter Dunn, who had an unbelievable weekend, took Bulldog Hanover into the lead at the half and never looked back, pulling away. Let's get the call to the finish from Ken Middleton.
In the second, fully extended is Allywag Hanover. Tattoo Artist scrambles for racetrack late on the outside third. It is Bulldog Hanover. He is opening up in deep stretch now to a 5-length lead, and it's Bulldog Hanover, a crowning moment on Canadian soil for Bulldog Hanover, and he's home in 1:46.4, a stakes record performance, and he's tied the track and Canadian record.
He felt great tonight, the fractions were fast, but we had a good helmet, until into the back stretch after the first quarter, and when he marched on there, got in the front, and, he grabbed hold of me like he has most of the year in his big miles, and gave me a lot of confidence coming out the last turn.
The pressure going into this race for me was excruciating. I mean, of the fans, all the fans, and I just wanted him to win so badly for the fans.
Turning for home again, same scenario as last time. You're on the lead, Allywag Hanover on your back, but when you started to see him step away, how did that feel?
Oh, it felt so good. When we started to step away, I felt really good about it. I knew he was right back to himself, and I've seen him do it so many times that I'm kind of counting on him.
For all the racing updates, visit Costa TV on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Go to hpibet.com for your wagering options.
This is the Excellent Sports Adventure, brought to you by Lycom.
Now that the baseball season has officially come to an end, let's take a look back at some of the highlights for your Toronto Blue Jays. Jays spinning their wheels at 46 and 42 when Ross Atkins decided to pull the trigger. Charlie Montoyo got the hook, replaced by John Schneider. It was a great move, as it turned out. Jays closed out the season at 46 and 28, grabbing the number one wild card spot under John Schneider. Too bad about that meltdown against Seattle in the wild card series. We were there.
The Jays had to win this game to prolong their season, and it looked like they had it in the bag. They had an 8-1 lead in this game. The bullpen couldn't hold it. The ball fell into no man's land, and you got to give the Mariners credit. They scrapped back to win this game. Seattle is moving on. The Jays are done. That comeback by the Mariners was next level.
Now, George Springer had elbow surgery. 6 Jays were nominated for Silver Slugger Awards. They're going to add a pitcher. They're going to add some bullpen help. Don't worry. This team will be a real serious threat in 23. Oh, the Toronto Argonauts were a pleasant surprise. McLeod Bethel Thompson was terrific. The Alouettes and Ticats both made the playoffs. Parity, folks. It was fun to watch Nathan Rourke. Most complete homegrown quarterback since Russ Jackson. What a career this guy can have. One of my favorite interviews of all time. Yes, it was. An interview with Frank Mahovlich, who won 4 Stanley Cups with your Maple Leafs. Talks about moving on to become a Red Wing.
Here it is, your return to Toronto as a Red Wing. And there we go. The big M dinks to the backhand and scores. I believe, is that Bruce Gamble in that?
Bruce Gamble,
yes,
I think that was, yeah.
Yeah, look at that blazing speed. I mean, when that puck came out the ice, there's no chance anyone was going to catch it.
Is that Pronovo? I think it was Pronovo.
What did it feel like when you came back to Toronto from Detroit and playing against your old mates? And hometown, I guess.
I just played my regular game,
Right.
I tried to do the best I could, and that was it. Yeah.
Well, doing the best you could was not too bad, because in that first season with the Red Wings, you had 49 goals. It was a career high, and then 38 the following year. Did you feel rejuvenated so much?
I felt great playing with Gordy and Alex Delvecchio for a year there, and it was really a good experience for me. And I did so well. I was really enjoyed. Of course, Gordy, he was in his 40s. And he did super well too. So we did very well. We got into the playoffs. So I think we beat Montreal out for the playoffs in 1970, 69-70.
Yeah.
So we did real well.
And then the Habs would win a lot of cups after that. So you beat a pretty good team. But you mentioned
Then they made the owner made changes, And Detroit fell apart. They made all those trades, and I got traded to Montreal, which was great.
Which is what happens when the owner sometimes starts meddling in the affairs of the hockey team, which happened in Toronto later. But when you mentioned playing with Gordie Howe, he actually had a career year that year that you joined the Red Wings. Gordie Howe, hit the 100-point mark for the first time in his career. That's pretty awesome.
Right.
Yeah. So not bad for a 40-year-old, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Time now for our shot of the week.
God damn it.
4!
Barb Boom Boom Otani, former school teacher, now an incredible golfer. She might have just put that ball on the green here at the par 4 second. What a shot.
Today's environmental tip: reduce the electricity you use. Use energy efficient light bulbs instead of regular light bulbs. They last longer, which will save you money. Make sure that you turn off the lights, the TV, and other appliances when you're not using them. And lower your air conditioning or heat settings when it's not necessary. Open your windows when fall arrives and wear more layers of clothing rather than cranking up the heat.
Rycom, passionate people who turn complicated business problems into simplified technology solutions for public and private sector real estate, properties, portfolios, and enterprise customers. Optimize and future-proof smart buildings from the ground up. The latest in fault locating, base building network design, managed services, cybersecurity, data analytics. Our fault detection will support all smart strategies, define projected outcomes for capital planning, and reduce environmental impact. Rycom, smart protection solutions. At Rycom, we're building a path to a smart and environmentally friendly future.
We want to thank all the folks who make this show possible. These are friends, trusted business associates, and all-around great people. We highly recommend them all. A reminder that the show is available on iTunes, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Google Podcast, and Pocket Cast, as well as the Spanglish Network, Zingo TV, and Buzz TV Live. Also, you really want to check out our YouTube channel, folks. There are past shows available, weekly sportscasts are on the show, all kinds of cool segments and features, fight highlights. Like and subscribe. It's free. Thanks once again to Gary Ray Ladler for being in the program. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show is brought to you by Brian Gribben Insurance Planning, helping you solidify your financial future.
At BGIP, what we do that's unique in the marketplace is we show people how to spend and enjoy their money in the early years of retirement without the fear of running out. Also, we're able to do this without you having to change financial advisors. Please look us up at bgip.ca today. Let's book a 30-minute phone call to see how we can bring value to you and your family in your planning.
Call Brian today for all your retirement needs. We did. 905-686-5678.
Do you want to buy or sell a home? Could 31 years of real estate experience help you? Why not speak to an amazing team that loves to overpromise and overdeliver? Aldo has a tremendous team of experts on staff. They are committed to making your next real estate transaction smooth and comfortable. Call 416-GET-ALDO or visit getaldo.com.
MNP, a leading Canadian national accounting, tax, and business accounting firm. MNP proudly serves and responds to the need of their clients in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, MNP provides a collaborative, cost-effective approach to do business and personal strategies to help people and organizations to succeed across the country and around the world. With local offices in Oshawa, Mississauga, Burlington, and more, their team is here to support you.